Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Unbuilt Future Dialogues. We begin in the next few minutes, and as you settle in, we'd love to know who is with us. Please introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name, share where you're joining from, your sector, and your area of work. We are beginning in the next few minutes. Karibuni sana. Welcome, Simon. Welcome, Susan. Can see Patience. Can see Nancy. Karibuni sana. Glad to have you here this evening. Welcome, Nabwire. Welcome, Matthew. Welcome, Lamek. Martin, Masharia, Karibuni sana. It's good to have you today with us. Welcome, Isabella. Karibuni sana. We begin in the next few minutes. As we wait to begin, please just introduce yourself in the chat room. We'd like to know who is with us tonight. So please introduce yourself and share your name, share your location, where are you joining us from, and your sector or area of work.
Hi, Fidel. Thanks. We are in.
Karibu sana. Good to have you, Isabella.
Yes, I am here. Thanks.
Karibuni sana. Thanks, Doreen. Doreen, karibu. Thanks, Nabwire. Joining from Mombasa. That's great. Karibu sana. Welcome, Sheila. Sheila Kamara, HR consultant. Is joining from Nairobi. Karibu sana. I can see a lot of us are joining from Nairobi. Wow. I can see Patience Mabuza. Sister Bekezela, Patience, joining from Zimbabwe. Amazing. You're welcome. You're welcome. Glad to have you. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so once again, karibuni sana, welcome. Good evening to everyone. My name is Fidel Omondi, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the second of our conversation series, the Unbuilt Future Dialogues, convened by Lapid Leaders Africa. Thank you for choosing to spend your evening with us. So whether you're joining us from Kenya, I can see some of us are joining from Zimbabwe or elsewhere across the continent and beyond, we are delighted you're here. So tonight is another webinar. Tonight is not just another webinar, and we continue a conversation about the future we are already building. And so over the next 90 minutes, we'll explore one central question. And the question we're exploring tonight is, what must we build now to shape Africa's next chapter? And so before we begin, I'd like to, again, just welcome everyone. Tonight, welcome, we're glad you're here with us. And so just a few notes before we get started. So today's dialogue is being recorded for learning purposes. And by remaining in the session, you acknowledge that the discussion may be recorded and that your participation, including your name, your voice, your video, and contributions in the chat may be included in the recording or related event materials. If you would prefer not to appear in the recording, you're welcome to keep your camera and microphone turned off and participate through the chat. We also encourage you to keep your camera on where possible. It always makes for a warmer and more engaging conversation. And so throughout the evening, we invite you to share your reflections, share your questions in the chat. Yeah, let's engage tonight with our speakers. We'll be introducing them much later as we proceed. So let's engage, let's ask questions in the chat room. So throughout the evening, we invite you to share as much as you can, share your reflections, share your experiences, share your questions. And you'll also open the floor for audience questions later in the program. And our team will curate a selection for discussion. Yeah, so before we begin, we've seen in our room tonight, we have people joining from across Africa, from Nairobi, Kenya, different counties. You're welcome. So if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name, share where you're joining us from, your sector. Yeah, it would be good to just get to know you more. So let's continue sharing. Let's continue sharing. Let's continue sharing. Yeah, I'm giving you a few minutes to share. Yeah, it's really wonderful to see some of us have already shared. I can see we're joining from different places, which is good. And I'm also seeing different sectors, from education, from technology, investment, entrepreneurship, civil society. We have HR sector. So it's really, 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 really good to have, different people from different sectors joining us in the room tonight. So one of the ideas behind the Unbuilt Future Dialogues is that the future isn't shaped only by experts. It is shaped by all of us. And so when we launched this dialogue series last week, we began with a similar exercise. It gave us a fascinating glimpse into how people imagine Africa's future. And tonight we'd like to revisit that question and see whether a different conversation and a different set of leaders shapes how we think about the future we are building. So we'd like to begin with a simple question, and we'll also be launching in the poll in the next few minutes. So where you're seated, where you are right now, maybe just close your eyes for a second and imagine it is the year 2050. Imagine it is the year 2050. So which of these headlines would make you most proud of what our generation choose to build? Just imagine we are just putting up the poll in the next few minutes. Kitty, if you could launch the poll. Imagine it is the year 2050. As we wait for the poll, let me just read a few of the options, that we have. So imagine it is the year 2050. Which of the headlines would excite you the most? And you can just put your responses on the chat box. So the first one, learning becomes a lifelong source of joy, creativity, and contribution. The next one is people work to contribute, not just to survive. The third one is capital flows to communities solving real problems. And the fourth one is public trust reaches historic high as institutions deliver results. The other one is no community left in the dark. Universal energy access achieved. And the last one is women lead 50% of public and private institutions across East Africa. So which of these headlines would excite you the most? If you chose learning becomes a lifelong source of joy, creativity, and contribution, just put one. If you're choosing people work to contribute, not just to survive, you can put two. The third one, capital flows to communities solving real problems. You can put three. Then the fourth one, you put four. Public trust reaches historic high as institutions deliver results. Then the other one is no community left in the dark. Universal energy access is achieved. Then and the other one, women lead 50% of public and private institutions across East Africa. Just continue putting the numbers in the chat room. And because of time, we'll proceed. Continue putting your numbers in the chat room. Yeah, and before we unpack them, so I'd like to take you back to our inaugural dialogue last week. We asked exactly the same question. The headline that resonated most strongly with the participant last week was capital flows easily to communities solving real problems. Yeah, and it's interesting that most of us chose capital flows easily to communities solving real problems. And I thought that was a powerful reflection of where many leaders believe Africa's next chapter begins, creating systems that enable good ideas and capable communities to access the resources they need to thrive. And this week's results are equally fascinating. And I'm so sure, yeah, it's very interesting. And they remind us that there isn't just one version of Africa's future. And every headline reflects a different understanding of what progress looks like. Some emphasize education, some emphasize leadership, some emphasize many other things. Others capital, others institutions, others opportunities. And none of these versions is really wrong. None of them is wrong. And in many ways, they complement one another because there isn't one future that is waiting for us. The future is shaped by the choices we make and the priorities we choose to build around. And that's why the Unbuilt Future Dialogues exist. Each conversation explores a different piece of the same larger question. And the question we've been trying to explore is, what must Africa build, really, before the future arrives? So tonight, our focus shifts from capital to leadership. And more specifically, the question we are asking tonight is, how do leaders create value within and beyond the organizations they lead? And this is a very interesting question. And we'll be glad tonight as we are joined with our speakers tonight to just explore it. And so I'd like to invite one final reflection before we begin tonight's conversation. And so I'd like for you to put in the chat, room and complete this sentence. I hope our generation will be remembered for building ... I hope my generation will be remembered for building, and there's no right answer. What will your generation be remembered for building? Yeah, there's no right answer, just your honest reflection. What will your generation be remembered for building? Let me see if there's any responses in the chat room. What will your generation be remembered for? Thanks, Teresa. I hope my generation will be remembered for building a culture of resilience and integrity. Thank you for Paul Mutinda, a culture of accountability. Thank you, Shelmy, systems that empower trust. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's keep them coming. Let's keep them coming. Sheila, thank you. Thank you, Stella. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's keep them coming. Let's keep them coming in the chat room. And those are really, really thoughtful responses. And they're also hopeful. And I think a reminder that the future becomes much easier to build once we can imagine it. Yeah, and so thank you so much for all of us who've been able to respond. Let's keep the responses coming. Yeah, so those reflections bring us beautifully to the purpose of tonight's dialogue. And so to help us frame the conversation, it is now my pleasure to invite the founder and the CEO of Lapid Leaders Africa, who is also the convener of the Unbuild Future Dialogue. Just a brief introduction of Esther, the founder of Lapid Leaders Africa. Yeah, so Esther is the founder and CEO of Lapid Leaders Africa, where she has spent more than a decade helping emerging and established leaders navigate moments of transition, rethink leadership, and build lives, careers, institutions of lasting significance. And before founding Lapid, Esther built her career in strategy, assurance, risk management at PwC Kenya and PwC UK, later serving in senior leadership roles within the financial services sector. And her experience across both corporate and social impact has shaped her conviction that Africa's future depends not only on exceptional leaders, but on the institutions they build. She's an Obama Foundation Fellow, an African Women in Public Service Fellow supported by the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy Foundation, and holds an Executive Master of Public Administration from New York University, where she graduated with distinction. Over the years, one question has increasingly shaped Esther's work. So how do we prepare leaders and the institutions they serve for a future that is arriving faster than many of our systems were designed to handle? And that's an interesting one, yeah. And that question became the foundation for the Unbuild Future Dialogue. Esther, thank you so much, for convening us this evening. And the room is ready for you. And over to you, Esther. Karibu sana, Esther.
Thank you, Fidel, and a big afternoon or evening, actually. Evening to each one of us. Thank you, Fidel, for that introduction, and thank you for the conversations that you're enabling us to have. It's nice to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us for today's dialogue. We are looking forward to the conversation and sort of just figuring out where we are at in that space. So a bit of context, this is our second dialogue of, I think, 5 or 6 dialogues that we're going to be having in the coming weeks. And the first dialogue focused heavily on capital and energy. And we spent quite a bit of time with Amos Gishinga, who is the principal for investments at FSD Africa, Financial Sector Deepening Africa, and is involved in quite a bit of due diligence and distribution of capital. And so we had quite a bit of conversations around capital. How do we get capital? How do we make sure that we utilize capital well? What are the things that they're interested in when they think about capital and distribution of capital? And so it was an interesting conversation and we loved it. But we were also joined by somebody called Dr. Ted Moyer. He was actually joining us from Germany, and he's in the space of climate, energy, and law, and did a fantastic job of helping us to see the intersection between energy law and, I believe, finances. It was a fantastic conversation because I think as an individual, I hadn't spent so much time thinking about energy, but he did a fantastic job of helping us to see the transitions of humanity and how they've connected with energy. And so those were the first dialogues. We are putting together some material that we will distribute with regards to that first dialogue in case you missed it. This is our second dialogue, and we'll be joined by two phenomenal leaders that I'm looking forward to talking to and having a dialogue with. But before we go into that, I want to hear from us a bit more and sort of ask if we are new. I like to start there. And so I want to invite us to put up in the chat room, is this the first time that you're joining us? Are you a mwenyeji? Please post up in the chat room whether this is the first time you're joining us or you consider yourself a mwenyeji. We have baptized you as a mwenyeji. So put up in the chat room, first time or a mwenyeji. And then the second thing I want is, if you were part of the conversation last week, kindly put up a conversation that stood out for you. What is one thing that was shared in the last dialogue that stayed with you? What's a thought that came through for you as we went through that conversation? Please put it up in the chat room so that then we also see some of the highlights from the previous conversation. A big thank you to everybody who is putting up their comments. I can see some mwenyejis. It's nice to see you, Matthew. Karibu. I can also, Shalmit, it's nice to see you. But I hope I can also, quite a bit of mwenyejis actually. Today we have Mary Kerubo, Karibu, Shalmith Karibu, Patience is a first time, welcome. Liz is a first time, welcome. Kindly put up in the chat room, is this your first time? Is this your second time? Is it you're a mwenyeji? If you're a mwenyeji and were part of the last conversation, kindly share with us what stood out for you. Cynthia, thank you for sharing. I'm a mwenyeji. Something that stood out is trust and capital are inseparable. And I really believe that. I'm a banker at heart. I've done quite a bit of work in the banking space. And I always talk about how part of the reason we pay very high interest rates is a trust gap. Because when you think about you giving out loans to a society where trust is diminished, then you must increase your interest rates so that then you cover for the risk that is lack of trust. And so in communities, for example, where you find people circulating money with ease, what they've done is they've built the trust infrastructure. And so I think that that conversation around trust is important. You cannot separate trust and capital. Trust determines capital rates, determines risk rates. And so it was a fantastic conversation to be able to have. Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing that. We also talked about energy, and energy determines if Africa fails or rises. And I like that. And this is not the first time when energy is at the center of conversations of development. I love the way we talked about fire and how fire changed the human experience. And then we started talking about the Industrial Revolution and how it activated or escalated through oil and coal. And those are a big part of that age. And we started talking about that this current age is going through an energy transfer, an energy transition. And we talked about nuclear energy, and I still shudder when I think about that. We are headed to a time when nuclear energy is to be normalized. But I remember one of the conversations we had was around this age that we are in, the knowledge and post-knowledge era, will be driven by either nuclear energy or renewable energy. For the longest time, people talked about new renewable energy, but increasingly people are talking about nuclear energy. Why? Because the AI needs are significant. You're not talking about just AI, you're talking about data centers that need to be cooled, that needs energy. And so there's a lot of conversation around how do we leverage on nuclear energy for all that. And so, in fact, I remember looking at a paper afterwards that was showing, that was shared by actually Amos, that was showing the extent to which countries are investing in nuclear energy. And so that was an interesting conversation. Doreen, it's nice to see you. People with disabilities were not included in the talk about capital and energy. They were, because you are here. And the fact that you're here means that they were included. Please share your own thoughts around what capital and energy means for people with disabilities. Contribute, and that's an important part of this conversation. The way we structure this conversation is it's not built around one person knows. We are facilitating a conversation. There are very many elements of this conversation we will not cover. And so what I encourage each one of you is to utilize the chat room. Imagine it as your classroom. Share your thoughts, ask your questions. Let's answer each other. Please don't imagine that we've landed a place where there is a space where everybody will answer all the questions. Our goal is to share bits and pieces that activate the conversation, but we would love to hear from each one of you. So please share within the room any thoughts that you have around this. Njoki, it's nice to see you joining these dialogues for the first time. Karibu sana. Terry, Lydia, I can see you guys. Welcome. Teresa, this is the first time I'd love to listen to the recording of the first meeting. I believe that there's a recording that's on YouTube, and if you're already registered, you should have already gotten a link to it. If you haven't, you will get a link to it. Isabella Karibo and everybody else, let's please keep sharing what stood out for you, especially if you joined the last conversation. Capital is more than money, and that was a nice conversation to have. I think one of the things that Amos lifted was when we think about capital, we think about capital in terms of receiving capital. But I like the way he talked about the process of capital, that there is thinking about capital as an input, thinking about capital as a process, and ultimately thinking about capital as an output. And one of the questions he challenged is, what are we doing in the middle part that produces capital so that then it goes back to the ecosystem as an input and as an output? And I think that was a fantastic conversation to have. Please keep sharing what stood out for you. We want to hear it. But as I've mentioned, today we are shifting gears. Let me just do a bit of context as we shift gears. As has been mentioned, my name is Esther Mwaniki. I'm the founder and the CEO of Lapid Leaders Africa. We've been in existence for the last 12 years. And at the core of the work that we sit with is a fundamental question around how do we prepare leaders, not simply to succeed in the world they've inherited, but to build the world that comes next. And so we think about at the core of leadership is a practice of building, that we are all beneficiaries of people who've come before us, who built for us, we inherited. And so we sit with the question of what are we building that others will inherit from us? And that question has taken us to boardrooms. It takes us to classrooms. It takes us to government. It takes us to communities. It takes us to organizations, not just in Kenya, but across Africa. And over the years, one observation has become increasingly difficult to ignore, that we are in the middle of one of the some people call it a mega disruption, some people call it a mega transition, but we are in a period of disruption. Is at the core of the work that we will be talking about in this space of Unbuild Futures, that we are in the middle of a disruption. If you are in the world, you will have heard about how artificial intelligence is reshaping work. I think we haven't seen how much it will change. We are just starting to see it. Climate change is reshaping everything from energy to migration to agriculture. Political systems are shifting. Capital is moving differently. Entire industries are emerging while others are disappearing. If you're in the development world, you will be one of the people who've been greatly impacted by how capital is shifting. In Kenya, as an example, USAID was closed, I think, early last year. And that shifted the development world because it wasn't just USAID, but many other funding institutions have been closing or making reducing the capital that is going around. And that means we're in the middle of a disruption. I still think this disruption will continue. When I think about AI and what is coming with energy shifts, I think it is a period of transition. And so we are living through one of the greatest transitions of our generation. And the challenge isn't simply that the world is changing. It's that many of the systems we continue to rely on today were designed for a different world. We talk about this a lot in some of our programs, that a lot of the systems we have today were designed during the industrial age, but we have shifted from that age. And so we have to ask what systems need to shift, which is at the root of the conversation of Unbuild Futures. And yet many of the conversations we continue to have were designed for yesterday. And that raises a question that is increasingly shaping the work that we do at Lapid. What must be built? What must be built so our institutions are ready for the future that is arriving? What must be built so that us as individuals are ready for the future that is already arriving? Thinking in the context of both the individuals and the institutions. Because for many years, our response was to focus on developing leaders. And I think we've done a fantastic job, and it's nice to always see some of our leaders who've joined today, and we continue to do the work of developing leaders. But we continue to believe that leadership matters deeply. But over time, we've realized something, that leadership alone is not enough. We can prepare extraordinary leaders, but if the systems they inherit remain fundamentally unchanged, those leaders spend much of their energy adapting to yesterday instead of designing for tomorrow. And so that has led us to a bigger question that at the center of the work that we are doing today. How do we not only prepare builders, And we do continue to prepare builders, but also create spaces where we can rethink the systems they are called to build. And so anchoring the conversation of the individual and the system and asking what needs to be done in the context of those two. And so the unbuilt future is our response to that question. We chose the name very deliberately. People often speak about the future as though it's already waiting for us, as though somebody has done the work of building. In reality, it doesn't simply arrive. It must be built. The future does not build itself, builders do. Every investment builds a future. Every school builds a future. Every business builds a future. Every government policy builds a future. Every technological platform builds a future. Every institution represented in this room is already shaping tomorrow. And the question is not whether we are building. The question is, what future are we building, and is it in service of us as a people? Or are we just inheriting systems and continuing what has been in existence? And so I'm going to repeat that question. What future are you building? And I want to invite us to share in the chat room. When you think about the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, what future are you building? And is it a future that's built on the past, or is it a future that's based on what's coming and the shifts that we are going through? Because every system produces exactly the future it was designed to produce. And so if we want a different future, we may need to build different systems. We may need to become different builders. And this is why these dialogues exist. Not to provide answers, and that's important, because part of the past systems taught us that there is an idea of a few people who have the right answers. And so many of us show up in places looking for right answers. Those don't exist. We are talking about an unbuilt future. And so our goal is not to provide the right answers. Our goal is to create a space where leaders from different sectors, and I want to keep encouraging you guys to share the sectors that you are in, where different sectors can wrestle together with questions that no single profession, no single organization, no single institution can answer alone. And so every dialogue explores one version of the same question. Whether that's the dialogue we had last week, whether that's a dialogue we'll have today, the same question is at the root of everything that we do, which is, what must we build? Not what do we want to build? What must we build? What must we build? And that conversation sometimes will take us to education. That conversation sometimes will take us to health. Today, it will take us to health. That conversation sometimes will take us to technology. Today, it will take us to technology. That conversation sometimes will take us to capital. As we've mentioned, it took us to capital last week. It will sometimes take us to climate, to energy. But that's because these are not separate conversations. Capital shapes education. Education shapes talent. Talent shapes innovation. Innovation shapes economies. Economies shape opportunity. So everything is connected. And one of the things that we talk a lot about within the context of LAPID is you must get out of silos that are just one sector driven. The practice of the future is building multidimensional understanding of things. And so everything connects. When relationships between systems change, the future changes. And I want to just repeat what I just said, because I think part of the past education taught us to sit in one lane. And I think there is value in understanding one lane with depth. I'm a huge believer of depth. But you also must broaden your mind and allow yourself to have what's called elastic thinking. Because elastic thinking will allow you to see, how does education affect economy? How does economy affect the HR practices? And we need to have that broad kind of thinking. How does technology affect climate, and vice versa? Before we begin, I'd love to start with a question. I won't spend enough time on this because we don't have enough time, but I want to hear from us. And Fidel will please pick up these answers. Who is one woman builder? I'm going to ask for women because today we are being led by primarily women, not primarily by all women. Who is one woman builder you deeply admire? And what is one thing that she has built that continues to shape other people's lives today? Who is one woman builder that you admire? And as you think about the woman builder you admire, think about what have they built? And more importantly, how does what they have built continue to shape other people's lives today? It could be someone from your family. It could be someone you've worked with. It could be someone from history. It could be a founder. It could be an educator. It could be a public servant. But I want to see women builders in the chat room. And the reason I love this conversation is I can tell you many women who've inspired me. And I have a whole list here, but I always like to bring in these conversations one woman that we really respect greatly and are doing some work with her. She's called Mama Wahukara. Mama Wahukara is, we spent quite a bit of time with the Last Crossroads cohort with her. She is an educationist. She's a social justice leader. She has been in the space of asking, what does it look like for us to build a society that's in service of its people? Many years ago, she was a headmistress in a school, but was at the forefront of conversations around how do we educate each other on the governance issues that the country was facing. Because of that, in the early 80s, when we had a coup and then sort of had the issues with President Moi that we did, she created what's called a Mwakenya, which was a newsletter that used to aggregate the governance challenges that we had then. And they would sneak that Mwakenya among their community initially, which was in Muranga, then it started to spread across the country. And the reason I love that is because she is very passionate about education. If you go to her house, she'll tell you, Esther, I don't go to the shamba. I don't go to the garden. And the reason I don't go to the garden is because I'm a teacher. I hire people to go to the garden. I do my work in her 70s, late 70s, still doing her work as a teacher. A couple of years ago, she was invited to the United Nations. There is a meeting that happens in September, UNGA equivalent. And she was given a script and told, go and read this on behalf of women builders of Africa. And she stood up and told them, this is what I was written for. I will not read it. This is my belief. And first of all, my belief is let my people go. The reason I love Mama Wahu is she reminds me the freedoms I have today, the freedoms to go to Twitter, the freedoms to have this conversation, they were labored for. Those women made significant sacrifices. She will tell you about how that at, I think 2 years old, her husband had to run to Tanzania on exile. And she was fired from the school and she had to move around with her kids, with Mwakenyas, with a commitment of this nation must be free. What are the responsibilities that you're willing to sacrifice for? Is the reason that I asked that question. Because what's striking isn't simply who we have named. It's what you've remembered. We don't talk about titles. We don't talk about awards. And I could tell you Mama Wahu was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. But we talk about the forests, the schools, the people, the businesses, the communities, the lives that were changed because of the work that they did. We rarely remember people simply because they were successful. We remember them because something continues to exist because they lived. And I think that's the most important distinction of leadership. Achievement is important, but if it is achievement that doesn't create an inheritance of a better society, that leadership should be stolen from you. I said it. And so tonight's conversation asks a question that sits at the heart of Africa's next chapter. How do we move beyond individual excellence? And individual excellence is important. But how do we ensure we have individual excellence, personal success, but also build systems that can endure? How do we make sure that in the spaces that we are in, we are adopting both individual excellence and the systems that are needed? Because Africa doesn't suffer from a shortage of exceptional people. We produce exceptional entrepreneurs, researchers, engineers, doctors, public servants. But how do we build institutions that are able to carry that excellence beyond the individual?
This meeting is being recorded.
And so what we'll explore is a question that runs through two systems that influence almost everything that we do, whether that's in technology, whether that's in healthcare. How do we embed leadership excellence and collective impact into our work as builders? We'll focus on technology, we'll focus on healthcare, not because those sectors exist in isolation, but because they reveal what becomes possible when innovation, when leadership, when institutions come together around a shared purpose. So we are incredibly privileged to be joined by two remarkable women who have spent their careers doing exactly that. And the first woman who has joined us is Catherine Muraga, who is the Managing Director of Microsoft Africa Development Center and the Engineering Director of that as well. And then we've also been joined by Dr. Anne Musuva. Anne Musuva, sorry about that, who is also the CEO of the Kenya Healthcare Federation. Both have worked at the intersection of leadership, innovation, and institution building, and I cannot think of two better people to help us explore tonight's conversation. I want to invite us as we listen to this conversation to not only ask whether you agree. Agreeing is not the biggest thing we need from us. It's to ask questions of one, what assumptions is this conversation challenging? Number two, what future does this conversation make possible? And number three, what must I build? What assumption is this conversation challenging? What assumption is this conversation challenging? Number two, what futures does it make possible? But number three, and most important, what must I build? Please use the chat to answer those questions, challenge ideas respectfully, build on one another's thinking, because the future does not belong to government or to investors or to entrepreneurs. It belongs to all of us. And so as we have this conversation, let's anchor it on the conversation of what must we build? And it's my great pleasure to welcome today's speakers, Catherine and Dr. Anne. Karibuni sana. I would like to request that we all put up some emojis to welcome them. Karibu, karibu, karibu. Thank you, Dr. Anne. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us. I'm going to read their bios, but before I do, I need to see more celebration, more emojis. I also want to see more women that we are celebrating who are builders in the chat room. Please make sure my chat room has all those women. It is very important for us to honor the women on who we stand on their shoulders. So please, make sure that you have an emoji and you have a chat going. And I'm going to start by reading their bios. I'm going to read your bio, Catherine, and Karibu, Catherine. I don't know if Catherine is here with us, but if she is, I'm going to request that we bring out the spotlight. Thank you, Catherine. And it's Karibu Sana. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. Karibu Sana. I'm going to read Catherine's bio. And Catherine is the Managing Director of the Microsoft Africa Development Center. I do need us to see her as we do this. So I'm going to ask that we spotlight her. Nisikue Catherine. Yes, Karibu, Catherine. It's nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor and a joy to host this conversation with you. Thank you for the work that we do. I'm going to read your bio just because I need for the rest of us to just meet Catherine. Catherine Muraga is the Managing Director of the Microsoft Africa Development Center. ADC is the name they go by. And she is the Engineering Director at Microsoft. She brings more than 15 years of experience in technology leadership across the manufacturing, aviation, banking and financial services, and technology sectors, including 9 years in executive leadership roles. It's possible it's more than that. In recognition of her exceptional contribution to technology leadership and advancement of purpose-driven innovation in Africa, she was recently recognized as one of the top purpose-driven leaders in 2025 by Lapid Leaders Africa. Please put up an emoji to recognize that we go through an extensive process of identifying top purpose-driven leaders in this country, people who lead at the center of leadership excellence and collective impact. And Catherine was one of the people we recognize. Please join us in celebrating her. And at Microsoft ADC, Catherine has been instrumental in shaping Africa's engineering ecosystem. During her tenure and her continuing tenure, she has sponsored 18 STEM university curriculum reviews. I'm going to repeat that. 18 STEM university curriculum reviews. which have been led by Microsoft ADC. She has championed the mentorship of more than 200 women who are pursuing STEM-related courses. She has supported the reskilling of 200 plus university lecturers. She strengthened the pipeline of future African innovators, technologists, and engineering leaders. That is not a mean thing to do, to step into the universities, to challenge the curriculum or expand the curriculum, to work with the lecturers, to work with the women. And she has the numbers that she'll share with us, but they did some phenomenal work in the context of the next generation of innovators, technologists, and engineering leaders. And we celebrate you for that. She's a recognized thought leader in digital transformation. She speaks globally on digital skilling, engineering, leadership, team culture, and the future of technology talent in Africa. She's a frequent contributor to regional and international technology forums where she advocates for inclusive, future-ready digital economies. She's also actively engaged with government on national and regional conversations around digital transformation, around innovation, and around workforce development. She serves as the board chair of Kopo Kopo, a leading Kenyan fintech where she provides strategic leadership. Before joining Microsoft ADC, she was part of the executive leadership team at Stanbic Bank Kenya and South Sudan, led the engineering and digital transformation there, has served as the director of IT and operations at CDN Bank, holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from African Nazarene University. If you're from African Nazarene University, please put it up in the chat room. You have a proud alumni here. Has completed executive programs at the Oxford University Said Sijui nimetumia Said Business School and Columbia Business School. I love Columbia Business School, digital strategies for business. Is passionate about leveraging technology to create meaningful business outcomes. Karibu sana, Catherine, to this conversation. That's a phenomenal bio that you have, and it's an honor and a privilege for us to have you in this conversation. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I don't know why my emojis have stopped. Please keep putting up those emojis. And I also want to celebrate Dr. Ann. It's such an honor and a joy to have you join this conversation, Dr. Ann. Thank you for the work that you do. I discovered that one of my alumni is your brother, and that means that you're inspiring even one of our young leaders. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I honor and celebrate you for who you are and for the work that you do. Dr. Ann Musuva is the CEO of the Kenya Healthcare Federation. KHF is its initials, Kenya Healthcare Federation, the umbrella body representing Kenya's private health sector. You know, health is special to me in this year. I am sorry, but I just see Sha as I read this. But Healthcare Federation, and in recognition of her exceptional contribution in strengthening health systems and advancing equitable healthcare and purpose-driven leadership in Africa, she was also recognized as one of the top purpose-driven leaders in 2025 by Lapid Leaders Africa. Please celebrate Dr. Ann Musuva for that. This is not a mean achievement, especially when you're in health systems. And because health systems affect all of us, you must release an emoji. She's a medical doctor by training. Dr. Ann has leadership experience, driving health systems, strengthening, driving health financing, policy reform across Africa. And throughout her career, she has worked at the intersection of government, private sector, and development sector, and civil society. And that's a big deal to help improve how healthcare is financed, delivered, and accessed. Before joining the Kenya Healthcare Federation, she served as the regional director for East and Southern Africa at ThinkWell, where she led multi-country teams supporting governments to strengthen health financing. And health financing is a big deal. I think everybody's trying to figure out how do we ensure that everybody has access to health, but there's a cost to that. And so health financing is the conversation around that, improve resource allocation and build more resilient health systems. She has led senior leadership roles at Population Services International, PSI. PSI does some phenomenal work, contributed to large-scale health programs that expanded access to quality healthcare. Widely respected as a systems thinker, as a collaborative leader, she holds a Bachelor of Medical and Surgery In this place, it's written as a Bachelor of Medicine and a Bachelor of Surgery, and then a Master of Science in Public Health from the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Belgium, and has completed executive education in strategy and leadership at the Harvard Business School. She is passionate about building healthcare systems that deliver dignity, equity, and lasting impact. In short, we have phenomenal women in this space doing some phenomenal work. And so even before this, we open up the session for them to speak, let's please take a few minutes to celebrate them once again for the work that they do. And the way we will start this is we will the way we will have this conversation is I will open this conversation to them to share some opening remarks so that I also keep quiet for a few minutes. We'd love to hear about your journey, some things that are important to you, just some opening remarks or some reflections. It doesn't actually have to be your journey, just some opening reflections. And then we will open this into a dialogue where I'll ask questions, and please also put up comments within the chat room. The team is looking for questions and we will pick a few. I bet we won't be able to answer all of them, but at least we'll try what we can. We can start with you, Catherine. Just some opening remarks on what comes to you. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much, Esther. Good evening, everyone. I love your energy. Oh, and it is evening for those in Nairobi or East Africa. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you so much, leadership at Lapid Leaders, Dr. Anne Musuva, fellow panelist. I also honor you. And I was looking at the names of people, builders in the chat. Wow, yes, we have great examples and great role models to learn from. We don't have a shortage of those. So I'd prepared some speaking remarks, but as Esther, you were speaking, I was convicted to change. And let me share a story. I joined Microsoft June 2022. And I remember one of my colleagues approached me and said, hey, I have experience in education sector, but providing technology solutions for education sector. And she told me she had this idea of what can we do with universities? It had not been done before. And I remember looking at her and asking her, will this work? She was essentially asking me, let us go to Kenyan universities, specifically deans of schools or chairpersons of computing, because we are a tech company, engage them on three things. Number one, let us look at the curriculum and say, is it fit for purpose? And I'll come back to why she raised this. And then number two, let us examine what is the cadence of training lecturers and how are they trained and what is the content of that training vis-a-vis to, you're only as sharp as what sharpens you. And then lastly, let us engage students in terms of, do they have a LinkedIn profile? Where are the jobs? What are the top skills beyond the degree? I looked at her and my first question is, how will this fly? And I'll tell you why I was skeptical. With all due respect, universities are full of protocol. And she told me, you know what, Kathy, she also holds a similar view, but she said, you know what, let's try. So I told her, let's go. And she told me for us to go to universities, first of all, we have to be kitted differently. You cannot show up in a university looking to engage students in a suit. And what we did is the first meetings would be with the vice chancellor or the senior most person, the chairperson of the computing departments. So we'd show up formally dressed. And then we also had regalia, would change, sneakers, jeans, t-shirt, because these things matter. It's part of architecture and it's part of driving change. So you cannot engage a very formal organization and you're not dressed up. Now, the first university we went to, we were met with a very protocol that I had shared with her and said I was very skeptical. But before I go there, in terms of how we were received, why did we do this? Because when Microsoft set up shop in Africa, they used to have two offices, and they still do, commercial and engineering. Engineering, this was the first time. A key data point that was collected during the interview process was a number of engineers were failing the interviews as much as their CVs looked A1. So it was a case of, how is it that people have many certifications, but the when the interview is subjected to actually hands-on, many were not passing. That was what the why. Anyway, back to the first university. We go in, and the first question that we are met by this vice chancellor, who is no longer in office, but this is not about the vice chancellor. They asked us, young ladies, because we happened to be all three ladies, all young looking. I possibly got my PhD when you were born. What can you possibly tell me that we don't already know? Please note, I did not mention, as we were walking to this vice chancellor's office, we left a room full of students because we would announce. I hope we didn't lose Esther. We used to announce on social
I'm very
media.
much here. I don't know what is
Fantastic. All right.
happening with our people. We do need, let me just help them. We need all of us to be spotlighted. This is a conversation. So I think they're removing some of us. Let's just have all of us.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Would put out adverts on LinkedIn. I know I used my LinkedIn to advertise and say, hey, we'll be in this university, please come. We had this campus tour, the whole marketing thing. So by the time we were walking to this vice chancellor's office, I could see the room was just filling up, give or take 700 to 1,000 students. And that was the first reception. What can you possibly tell us that we don't already know or are experts in? And he went on, and Esther shared this story. He went on to ask me, because he's the vice chancellor of this university, shouldn't he be meeting Mr. Satya Nadella, who is the current CEO and chairperson of Microsoft Corporation? Yes, I bit my tongue. And the reason I bit
I
my
am
tongue
still
is
rolling my eyes. Even now, I just can't help.
I bit my tongue because I remembered our why. What is our why? When we joined Microsoft Engineering, it was a full appreciation. Personally, I've grown my tech career in this market. I never thought an engineering of this magnitude would be set up here and also be exposed to this scale, global scale. So I said, because I've grown up here and you've seen the data from interviews, this is our opportunity to engage the students. You're doing this because of students. Anyway, we finished our presentation. The same gentleman had so many questions and full of appreciation of what we shared. It is fine, he did not apologize. We're not there for that. We went on to engage the students. And that started off our journey of engaging 16 universities, reviewing 18 curriculum, and training 300 lecturers. Why did we take this approach? One of the things we discovered in the curriculum, a number of units were being taught towards the end of the degree program that when you compare with other advanced markets, they were taught from the onset. Meaning the interaction with some, especially not only the knowledge, but hands-on, we need to interact it much faster. And it's also a fact, many people interact with computers when you go to university. Unlike other markets, especially public institutions, unlike other markets, some of them grew up with these gadgets. So how do we shift that? Number two, there were some courses that were outdated. So we remain very grateful for universities that agreed to change that. And then lastly, why did we choose to train lecturers? This was the thinking. One lecturer possibly has interacts with more than 100 students because a number of them don't only teach in one institution, they do so in various institutions. And then lastly, just engaging students in various programs. And one of them that is dear to my heart is how do we keep the very few women who take up STEM courses to ensure that they complete the degrees. So we started a mentorship program, as I wrap up, where would match students to ladies working in Microsoft. So somebody came up with a curriculum internally, and all these guys, the review of curriculum, training lecturers, all this is staff within Microsoft who understood the vision of what we are doing, and they volunteered their time. The other thing we leverage from them, Microsoft, because it's a big organization, so there are people with bachelor's, master's, and PhD in various tech courses. We leverage the ones who have PhD to actually do the more heavy lifting because we've reviewed curriculum for bachelor's, master's, and PhD. That is my story, Esther. I thought to ditch my notes and just go to my story. Yeah, and I've explained my why. And for me, the curriculum bit is central and core because curriculum go for years before it's reviewed. Number of students that will interface with it. One lecturer interfaces with X number of students. And for me, it's about, I know not everyone will join Microsoft, but we've shifted the tech ecosystem. And happy to come back and talk about what opportunities am I seeing. Thank you,
I
Esther.
love that. I love, and I think that was the right place to actually start that conversation. And it's because, and we'll talk about it a bit more as we go. It's very easy for leaders to do the easy work of being an MD. It's not easy, it is hard work. But let's say the easy work of doing MD is easy for you to do, but you chose to do that easy work and add yourself more easy work. And it wasn't just any easy work. You landed in universities. I have worked with universities. I know how our universities are structured. They are very bureaucratic. And so you chose to go and face another hard part of your job, not for an extra coin, not for extra anything, but because of the commitment to generations that will come in effect. Because if you're going to change a curriculum, it's taken 100 years to be changed, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever, but it will also then impact 5, 10 years to come. And I love what you're saying. Then it's not just the curriculum, it's also even the lecturer, which means, well, you could say right now, maybe you've reached 10,000 students as an example. I'm sure it's more than that. In reality, this is a project that goes to the hundreds of thousands of people. And we really honor and celebrate you for that. Thank you for
Thank
doing
you. Thank you,
work.
Esther.
And I just want to lift 3 things that are important even before you go to Dr. Anne. I think one of the things that I had you say as you started is let's try. And I think that's
Yes,
an important idea to sit with
yes,
because many people sabotage things because they see the challenge. But I hear you saw the challenge. But in addition to seeing the challenge, the H and the S are playing in my head. But in addition to seeing the challenge, you said, let's try. And I think
yes.
that's important for each one of us to pick up as an important point to think about as you think about unbuilt futures. The invitation is let's try. Let's start. Let's figure it out on the move. And so I think that's a powerful thing that I'm hearing you say. The second thing I'm hearing you say, and there are many things I've written here, but I'm just going to lift 3. The second thing I'm hearing you say is when the work is important, you adjust for the work.
Yes.
Because what I'm hearing you say is you go to a university, you meet with the lecturers and the administration in what you need to wear. You go and you meet with the young people in what you need to wear. That clarity of your vibe and the importance of the work will mean you adjust. Now, the reason I say that is because I work with many leaders, and at the root of a lot of people getting stuck is we want to do things the way we want to do them. In the final end, driving change is about who are you, why are you doing it? What do those people need from you? And what do I need to do to become that person? And so
And
I
what
really love
language and what vocabulary do they understand?
that.
Yes.
Learning that vocabulary and sharing that vocabulary. That's so big because I think equally important is we show up and we want to speak our own vocabulary. And so you want them to fit into your vocabulary. But in the final end, you will kwama. And you will kwama because you refused to figure out what adjustments do I need to make in my dress code, in my language, in my perception so that the work gets done. And it's also an idea of the work is more important than the comfort. That's your dressing and your language. And so I love that as well. And then I'm going to just lift this because I'm just going to lift it because najua kuna mtu anahitaji kusikia nikisema this. I love that you used LinkedIn for this work. The reason I say that is because I encounter so many conversations of comfort that mean people who don't want to set up in LinkedIn, they don't want to do posts, they don't want to have a voice. At the root of all those problems is yourself. You have chosen to be more comfortable than committed to your mission. And because of that, your comfort has taken precedence to the mission. What I hear you say is the mission was we need to have people in the classes. My LinkedIn becomes the job. And I wonder how many people whose unbuilt futures don't become a reality because you're more committed to your own comfort. I hope that you have heard what I have said,
In
which is
fact,
you're all
Esther,
by yourself. Go for it.
Esther, let me just add something as before I hand over to Anne. When we said let's try, one of the things that is big in big tech is experimenting. I told my colleague, let's go for it. What I didn't mention is we kept pivoting. We're like, oh, this is where we started. This worked, this didn't work. We kept pivoting.
Mhm.
Number two, when you engage in university students, you don't show up with corporate language.
Mm.
But I'm also not saying you dilute the conduct so much. They must also see there's a level of professionalism, but language matters.
Absolutely.
Then the last thing on LinkedIn, one of the things that is a principle within Microsoft, each development center doesn't have its own LinkedIn. So I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to use mine. And I had to get out of my comfort zone. And why this is important is because we have to tell our stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you don't tell, and then the beauty is we're living in a time where all these platforms are available. Let's use them and tell our stories, because if we don't document and tell our stories, who will? Thank you.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that as an opening remark. I hope you're picking up some things that are useful for yourself as you think about your unbuilt futures. Karibu sana, Dr. Anne. Please share with us some opening reflections that are in your heart, just based on what resonates with you. Karibu.
Thank you so much, Esther and Lappy Leaders, for having me. I hope you can hear me clearly. And the topic that we chose for today, Esther, is so apt.
Dr. Anne, I think your internet is a bit shaky. Is there a way it will stabilize?
Is this
I want to make sure we get everything that you say, but let's
right?
try.
Am I
Let's
breaking
give
up?
it one more round.
Okay.
Yeah, go. Let's
Is this any better?
It is actually.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I was saying that, this topic that you've chosen is so apt, given all the developments in the country, in our country, Kenya, and on the continent as well, right? The role of systems, the role of institutions in designing Africa's next chapter. And for me, this is something that I faced very early on in my career. So about 15 years ago, I'm fresh from medical school. I've been sent to a district hospital that was in Makueni. And for me, I was here to save the world, right? And I know this is how many doctors feel when they have left college. And at that point, I think our vision is very narrow. And our understanding is that, it's you as the doctor and the nurse and the other health workers that are really contributing to this health system and that are really, changing lives, healing people and so on. But I very quickly realized that for us to address the issues in the health sector, for us to, to really make strides in this journey towards universal health coverage, individuals, whether it's doctors, nurses, hospitals, infrastructure alone, wouldn't get us there. And so I remember, for example, arriving very excited in this public hospital, and at 7 a.m. landing in the ward for my ward round and finding myself there alone. The nurses hadn't reported for the ward round. And I very quickly realized that, culture is strategy for breakfast. The culture of the institution. And I think many of you who have interacted with the public sector, these are challenges that, you can say faced in the health system. And I faced that head on as a very young, energetic, eager doctor. I would prescribe medicines that wouldn't be issued, and going to follow up at the pharmacy, I'd find that they're out of stock because the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, KEMSA, had not delivered them because they were also out of stock. And, the other patients would come that would require them to pay for certain services. At that time, we had NHIF, and it wasn't what it is now. So many patients still had to pay out of pocket for inpatient services and outpatient services as well. And there are patients who actually couldn't afford care. And, you'd watch a patient deteriorate, and there aren't very clear mechanisms of how to waive costs, and especially when this patient required referral. And so, Esther, this topic is really important because I very quickly realized that for us, to really progress and to move the needle towards this vision, this very ambitious vision that the country and the continent has of universal health coverage, we had to address issues in the whole system and institutions. And as you rightly said, Esther, Africa does not lack ideas. Africa does not lack policies. Africa does not lack strategies. In fact, one of the things that we are often blamed for in Kenya is that we have very beautiful, amazing policy documents, gathering dust on our shelves. And what really then will transform these, these bold ideas and the ambitions within these policies and strategies to the vision of universal health coverage of quality, affordable, equitable care, basically where every single Kenyan can access healthcare, whether, regardless of their income status. That's the vision of universal healthcare. And the only thing that can translate these amazing ambitions into this UHC or quality care is the institutions that we have and the strong systems, basically strong institutions and strong systems. Institutions that outlive political changes. The challenges, Esther, that we have in Africa are pretty unique compared to other, I would say, institutions in the global north. One of the challenges that we face is resource scarcity, right? If we look at our global disease burden in Kenya and in Africa, it's really huge compared to the resources that are available for the country to be able to offer quality care for Kenyans. So we really have resource constraints, and still many people have to pay out of pocket to access care, leading to what we call catastrophic health expenditure, people selling their cows, their land, their property in order to be able to access care. This is a challenge that we typically don't see in other countries such as Europe, for example. So this is one challenge that we really have here on the continent. I think the other big challenge that we have on the continent are the emerging diseases that are coming. We have the scale of Ebola right around our border. I think it's just been declared free in Uganda. But we always have these sorts of diseases just looming around. And our health systems are not strong enough yet to be able to counter these emerging threats. In addition, we have what we call this triple burden of disease, right? So we have communicable diseases. These are diseases which are spread easily from person to person, such as TB, malaria, HIV. We have a much higher burden than other countries in the global north. At the same time, Kenya and Africa now has a rise in non-communicable diseases. Diseases such as diabetes that were relatively uncommon very many years ago are now on the rise. Cancer cases, I think every single person on this call knows somebody close to them, that is, has cancer, who unfortunately has passed away from cancer. And then we have injuries, accidents as the third, burden of disease. So we have this rising burden of this triple burden of disease. I think the other interesting thing that is quite specific to the continent is a fragmented set of actors in the health system. So of course, like in Kenya, for example, we have the national government, we have the county government, we have the faith-based sector, we have the private sector that I represent, but we also have development actors. So these are donors, NGOs, and while they have been very helpful in helping us address a number of the health issues on the continent, the reality is that sometimes they also influence our policies, influence our health outcomes, and sometimes in ways that are not always responsive to the needs of Kenyans. And so the challenges that we have as a continent are so unique, are so significant. And it's only strong health systems and strong institutions that can really help us address this fragmentation, increase the resources that are important. And so, how do we build these health systems? What sort of institutions do we need to have on the continent? I think one is institutions that are people-centered, that are truly people-centered, institutions that are truly responsive to the needs of Kenyans. And so one of the ways that we can build such institutions is by asking ourselves, what conditions are Kenyans suffering from? And are they, for example, reflected in the SHA benefit package, right? And those of you who've been in the health sector for a while, may know that, for example, 15 years ago, cancer was not covered in the NHIF benefit package. There was nothing there if you had diabetes, right? But if somebody had, for example, HIV, TB, those were things that were totally covered by the health system because that was influenced by donors. And so we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, donors aside, NGOs aside, what are truly the needs of Kenyans, and are we responsive to those needs, right? Do our pharmacies, do our health facilities stock the drugs that are required by our Kenyans? Are we building strong primary healthcare systems? So typically, if you go to big level 4 facilities, level 5, level 6, they are pretty well stocked. But if you go to your dispensary or health center in a place like Kabonzweni in Makueni, where I come from, where my parents come from, you come face to face really with the challenges of the health system. These are the facilities that are most ill-stocked in terms of drugs and also in terms of human resources for health. So you might find a whole health facility just being manned by one nurse. And yet this is really the first point of care for very many Kenyans, primary health care. This is the point that, most Kenyans' needs should be addressed. And so again, are we being responsive to the needs of Kenyans based on also how we are allocating our resources in the health system? So I think I'm also leaving you with questions that you should ask yourselves, and also engage your members of parliament, because they allocate resources for these sorts of things. And so I think as a continent, we've made strides, especially here in Kenya, but we still have a very long way to go. Africa is a continent that is on the rise. I think the average age is like 19 or 20. So critical questions we need to ask ourselves: how are we harnessing this demographic dividend, this bulging youth population, to drive forward our country, our economy, our health systems, and how investing in them now for them to be healthy, to contribute to the workforce in the future. So maybe a few things I just leave you with. Esther, let me pause there for now. Thank you.
Wow, love it. Thank you, Dr. Anne. Those are such fantastic reflections to start with. And you took me to have an aunt who has cancer and had an issue in a local hospital, ended up having to go to India. And that's not a one-off story. It is a very common issue that you will hear in many spaces. And I think that's what I want us to hold as we think about healthcare, that it's not about doctors, it ultimately, or even the NGOs, ultimately it's about us. It's that the human experience needs to constantly thinking about healthcare as a big part of our bigger needs. And I like what you said about that at the root of the question we need to sit with is, what does it look like, one, to build stronger institutions and systems? I don't think that there is any way around that when you think about healthcare and even many other of the challenges that we think about. At the root of a lot of the problems that we've had is their personality based. One of the questions that I had, and I will pose it at some point, is how do you manage healthcare in constant political systems that are changing? Because that is a conversation for stronger institutions and stronger systems. And so I love that you've raised that. And then I like what you talked about in terms of the fragmentation of the sector. That's real. But I think for me, one of the things, there's somebody who did a study. I'm just going to throw this out there. It's a documented study. And they talked about, if you go aggregate the resources that we got from USAID and equivalent in terms of the distribution of condoms, a lot of those resources would have taken just 3 years to build a manufacturing system within the context of here, and that money then becomes used at something else. And I do agree that there are things that they've helped with, but I think it goes back to the question of people-centered and which people. Is it us or is it their people? And how do we anchor us, Sisi, our children, our people, at the core of the decisions that are made with regards to health is one of those things. And I also hear you talking about the power of curiosity, that a lot of the health solutions are not about borrowing, but about being anchored on who are we, what are our emerging needs, who is thinking about those needs. And I think those are big things. And I do know we will not do justice to this conversation. I love what you said about culture. But I think I have a question, and we will now pick up a bit more questions. And this is actually off from what you just said. One of the things, Dr. Anne, I wondered is how do you encounter the system in Makueni? You show up, there's no nurse, hakuna dawa. How do you not become numb?
Yes, that was something that was really difficult, and especially because I was coming from a faith-based facility where everything worked, right? It was a mission hospital, which was fantastic. Our consultants were always on call to support us as young doctors. Everything worked seamlessly. Then I landed in this district hospital, where first I was the only doctor. So I was, I was only there to consult myself. I couldn't go and leave because I was so scared if I go and then we have an emergency. Nearest health facility that I can refer to is 2 hours away. But I think one thing that that sort of kept me going is one, appreciating the sort of little power that I had as an individual and the power I had to influence change within my sphere of influence. And I remember showing up at the ward every single day at 7 in the morning and waiting for the nurse. And a week after, she actually started showing up early because I couldn't do the ward round alone. Because you see the patient and then you typically leave the nurse to follow through with with the treatment regimen and so on. And so I would show up consistently, but it wasn't easy. And like you change things slowly, but you start with your own individual behavior. And I think the other thing that I would say also helped change that health facility was also when I took a real interest in the needs of the staff, the nurses that were there, the clinical officers, and so on. And sometimes it's small things such as allowances that haven't been paid for 2 years that make people very demotivated. Sometimes it's the living quarters for the staff, which are disheveled, the compounds are not kept clean. And so people are not really motivated about where they're working, right? And it didn't always mean bringing in additional resources. I think what I really learned is that with the resources that we had, and I am a big believer that the resources that we have on the continent are enough for us to deliver meaningful change for Africans without even additional resources, because I saw it with the little resources that we had in that district hospital and sort of improving accountability that wasn't always easy, and improving transparency around how those resources are used. We're able to shift a lot of things, including, I remember when I came to that facility, we had 2 ambulances that had been stuck at the garage for 2 years.
Wow.
Because their costs, yes, because we hadn't paid the garage, and so the ambulances had been there. And what that meant is that if a mother came with a complication that we couldn't handle and we needed to refer them to the provincial hospital, they had to look for a taxi themselves to go. And this is in Makueni. I don't need to tell you about the economic, conditions of the people of Makueni and many other rural areas. And so you can be sure that there are many patients who would die trying to, get that taxi, raise the costs, for that 2-3 hour ride to the next big referral hospital. And getting those ambulances out for me was an immediate priority, and I did not need any additional resources to do that. It was just the typical resources that we were collecting from the facility, being clear about what our priorities were and allocating those resources like that. Of course, I was fought a lot, but also had a lot of support from other workers in the hospital who also really keen to see results. And so I think also the other thing about the institutions that, the strong institutions that we must create are institutions that must be ready to be held accountable by the people we serve, by the communities that we serve, and so having those strong governance structures is really important. Now, at hospital level, we had a governance structure that constituted of members of the community. they formed part of the board, and allowing them to truly hold us accountable and to bring the grievances of the community around what they're experiencing at the hospital, and being open to listen and make the changes that we needed just with the resources that we had, I think is really critical in terms of building strong institutions. So that accountability, two-way accountability, and being open to be held accountable as leaders is something that's also really critical, Esther. I think one of the things that, gives me a lot of, I would say, hope is a growing political confidence and the demands that our young people are making on leaders, on the government, and I think that gives me a lot of hope, because I think we have to be held accountable, right? As a government and all of us as leaders, wherever we are, we have to be held accountable, and we have to listen and allow ourselves to be made accountable. And I think that's something that's really critical for the continent moving forward.
Yeah, I love those thoughts, Dr. Musuva, and I just want to lift a few things that I think are important for all of us. I love where you started that. What can I do with what I have, with where I am? One of the frameworks that we use a lot within the context of a lot of our programs is a framework we call hands. What is in your hands? That's built around what Moses was asked, what's in your hands? And I love that because many times we want to show up in places and be victims. And we talked about this last week. But the biggest gift as leaders we have is agency, is saying, I will not be a victim. I will ask, what do I have? How do I activate what I have? And I think we cannot belabor that enough, because the question that I asked you, Dr. Anne, was why didn't you become NAM? And the reason I asked that question is my experience is many of us become NAM. We decide the government is bad. We decide, after all, nase hakujangi kwa kazi. We decide it's never that serious. But I think what I'm hearing you say is you understanding as an individual, you have a responsibility, you have capacity, you must activate it. And so because you showed up every morning, then now starts to think, well, after me, what am I doing in my house? Sleeping. But how many places and how many institutions become dysfunctional and more dysfunctional because you justify your lack of activating yourself? And so that influence and change starts with you is something I think that I'm catching from both you and Catherine, that you must ask, what do you have? How do you activate what you have? And I think that's powerful. And then the power of observing. I'm a very faith-based person and I like the Bible, and I will actually borrow some things from it today. And one of my favorite stories is when Moses goes up the mountain and he finds a burning bush, and he stops and he starts to ask, what's happening here? And the reason I love that moment is I think there are very many people who would find a burning bush and go away. They do not sit with that burning bush. But I think what I'm hearing you talking about is learning to watch what is in your systems. I hear you say that you watched the employees and assume that they're not disconnected because they're bad people. It's that they haven't been paid for 2 years, that they don't have housing. And then you ask, what can I shift? But to do that, you must see. Like, you must allow yourself to have the curiosity to see what's going on here. What can I then be able to fix? And how can I be able to utilize that? And then with that, go the extra mile. Show up, see the burning bush, and say, you know what? Let's have a conversation with this burning bush until we have an answer. Because it's very easy to see burning bushes, to see staff who are not reporting on time, staff who don't have housing, and say, hey, huku mambo ni magumu. I actually came from a mission-driven hospital. Things were organized. Where do I run? I always tell people, this is me. This is my conversations. I think about Moses going up the mountain and coming down and finding the brokenness that he finds. And I always think, and you did not run back to the mountain. You did not go back up. Because sometimes we could easily choose the easy way out. But what I'm hearing you say is you chose the extra mile and ask, what resources do we have? How do we fix the housing, or how do we fix the ambulance? What can we do that is able to sort of just fix, even if it is one thing? And I think that's a big thing. Looking for supporters. And I like what you say, there are people who fought you, but bigger, there were supporters. And I think that's something about changing any system. There will be people who will fight you. It's a given. But there will also be people who will support you. It's what you choose to focus on, and look for the one who supports you and let's say, let's do this work together. Or you get caught up in the mud of fighting with the people who are fighting you, and those exist everywhere. And then love where you just ended in terms of the power of accountability. I also love, and if there are any Gen Zs in this call, we want to celebrate you. Thank you for the accountability that you're doing at national level. Thank you for the accountability that you're doing at organization level. Thank you for the accountability that you're putting in place in family and in every place. And hopefully you're doing the same thing for yourself, holding yourself accountable as well. But I think it's the power of accountability in shifting things, that you have a community board. I have an alumni who, I won't go into too much details, but he's doing some work around how do we bring back accountability systems in some of the public systems. I can't go into too many details, but I think it's how do we embed community boards that tell us, is this hospital serving us? Or is it serving itself? Or is it serving the donors? I think that's a powerful way to think about the work that you're doing. And so thank you for sharing that. Love it. Catherine, I want to come back to you, and a lot of the work that you do, and I will allow you to sort of just decide what you're able to share around this. But there's some conversations that we kept talking about that were around that many of the breakthroughs that we are benefiting from today were first imagined and researched decades ago. Like this, today we have some things that we are benefiting from, perhaps AI, perhaps Zoom, perhaps I don't know what else. And it's easy to see it in the context of what we are doing today. But in reality, those things were built years ago. We are just imagined, researched for years. We are just starting to benefit from them. And the reason that struck with me is because it reminded me that most of the most important things in societies take years. And what I find is many of us, we have a bad relationship with time. We are looking for quick wins. We want to make the house to stand in 2 days. But in reality, the greatest things of life, they are imagined, they are researched for decades. And so I just wanted you to share what you're comfortable with in that context. How can leaders think differently if you're building not just for today's problems, but for generations that we may never meet?
100%, Esther. And before I answer the question, and if I lose my thought trail, you'll repeat the question.
Yes.
As Daktari was speaking, she reminded me of some things. I also wrote here, work with what's in your hands. What I didn't share in my story is, where did we get the curriculum? Where did we get the content? We borrowed from HQ. So at times we have resources, we have things that are reachable to us that we can repurpose to fit the context that we are in. Or we can borrow from another jurisdiction and say, 1, 2, 3 will not work, but the others, or I can tweak it as follows. Yeah, it got me thinking there. And then also, the other thing I thought to mention as she was speaking is, I think as leaders, we have to discern seasons right, because there are some windows that open opportunities. And if you do not seize that window, if it goes, it goes. It's like we say in Kenya, ikienda imeenda. So it's having the capability to discern. Yes, there's a window that has opened. There's a key ally who's a major stakeholder somewhere. They can drive a policy change, can influence something, right? What are those windows and what are we doing about them? But are we discerning in the first place?
Can I just say
And the
something about
reason
that one?
yes,
It's discerning and action, because
yes,
I love what you said about the window opens for a
Mm,
certain time. And I think also it
yes.
was mentioned before last week. I think we imagine that the window will always be open. And
Mm-mm.
so there are possibilities that you can activate, but your brain tells you, let me procrastinate. But
Mm.
in reality, they are windows. And understanding them as windows, designing that window bigger, activating those windows is a big thing for leaders. And I love that.
100%. And then going back to the why, for example, the things I shared earlier, those were not in my balance scorecard. Nope. It's one of those things you do, you're like, oh, you did this fantastic. Now, where are we on your balance scorecard? Yeah, but it's sitting deep instead of being numb. I loved how Daktari talked about it. Instead of the issue numbing you, decide, you know what, here's a window. I have the resources, or I'll tweak the resources that are in my hands, and there's a season. Coming to your question,
Sorry, I just have to jump into that fast still.
go for
And the
it.
reason and the reason I have to jump into it is part
Mhm.
of the reason I find many people are unhappy in the workplace, disenfranchised in the workplace, is every day all you think about is your employer's goals, which is important.
Mm.
But if you do not have a clear sense of what is important to you as an individual and asking, how do I leverage on what I have in this space
Mm.
to be able to activate those as well, you will continue to be disenfranchised and unhappy. Oh, and no one is coming to fix that, unfortunately, because it is your responsibility to understand this matters to the organization, this matters to me. There is a world where I marry those two. Let me find it.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
doing that work is one of the things that I think you're activating with this conversation. You will not get somebody to come and tell you, Esther, go here, the resources, go here and do the following. It is, I want to do this. And what do I have access to? How do I activate it? And I think that's a powerful way to think about our leadership.
100%. And what platform have I been accorded in this season, and what am I doing with that platform? To your question, I love stories. I'll give you two stories. I don't know if you guys remember during COVID time, Zoom was miles ahead in terms of capability compared to Microsoft Teams. I don't know if you remember. In fact, a number of people had challenges in terms of, activating the different features and everything. Microsoft Teams was a few versions behind in terms of capability. Why do I raise this? Office is, I don't have the book nearby, but Office is what houses Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Word, and all those things. One of the things that I've come to learn about the history of Microsoft, just answering back to your question, some things take time and it is deliberate. This story shows me that there are instances where leaders can have deep conviction and courage about a long-term view and decide, because this is a commercial setting, decide we are aiming for position one. There's a very fierce competitor who has position one, but we are going to keep that number one so busy because we are really going to try and catch up. That was the case with Zoom. Today, if you look at Microsoft Teams, it has really caught up. Let me give another example that perhaps might land better. Google is known for search. If you want to search anything, in fact, we even made it a verb, just Google it. I don't know how many of you know the Microsoft search product. It's called
Still
Bing.
edge. Oh, it's
There's Edge, yes, Edge, but we used to call it Bing. And Google is always been known as a world leader in search. But this book I read, it's Innovations at Microsoft, when Microsoft was celebrating 50 years last year. One of the things that they decided, they're going to be a fierce number two. And then now, over time, a window opened with AI, Copilot. And a decision was made, let's put Copilot on the browser, and it grew the customer base. So it takes conviction and courage to say, let's build for the long term. Another story, still within Microsoft. Quantum computing, as a quantum computing department that was set up in Microsoft. Stories has it's a 30-year-old department. And quantum computing is I think the vision was quantum computing is about how do we do computing beyond what can be achieved by normal computers. It's a lot of physics. But what I find compelling about this story is Microsoft has, this year it's 51 years, it has had 3 CEOs: Bill Gates, the founder, Steve Ballmer, and now Satya Nadella. What is interesting about quantum computing, a department was set up. Quantum computing is a specialized area in the world of computing, but they bet on the long game. It has traversed these 3 CEOs. The company is 51 years old, as I said. And because of the highly specialized nature, it is deep research. You can imagine year on year approving budget for research because it's a long-term play. And the patience. I can only imagine what investors would keep asking, when are we going to see the results of this research? And then also the ability to do knowledge transfer across generations. So things to do with documentation, the repositories. But what is the architecture to store all that knowledge and ensure that it is handed over, in a succinct manner, what is relevant, what is changing? And then also just the ability to hire right and keep that talent engaged and still sell the vision. We're still going to the moon, guys. Stick with us. Stick with us. And then for it to have a major breakthrough this year, either last year or this year. I was hearing the story this year in Seattle in January. So you can just imagine that long-term view, the patience, the setbacks, the skeptics, but you keep putting in budget. I think another local one, and Esther, I shared this as we're preparing for this, because I always like to look at a local context. We all know Kenya Commercial Bank. I've been reading Martin Oduro Otieno's book, and he's also a former CEO of KCB. One of the chapters he talks about succession planning, but what caught my attention with regards to this conversation is KCB seems to have built a system or an architecture of identify who's going to be the next CEO, and the bank performance continues. So there's something there to be studied. And it's even interesting. So we had Martin Oduro Otieno, there's Joshua Oigara. Current Group MD is Mr. Paul Russo, who used to be in HR, had a stint at National Bank, and now he's the group CEO. So it's something that we ought to study. And I'm sure in their books, in their system, I'm sure they're thinking about who is next. What is that process they have of manufacturing and producing that we need to learn and potentially transfer those skills to local enterprises? And one of the ones that come to mind is we have so many amazing SMEs in our ecosystem. The one that comes to mind, and for no reason, Mudokinjo Hardware and Paints.
Yes.
Imagine hearing about Mudokinjo, 20 years from now, the transition from founder, and many others as an example. Yeah.
Love it. I love it because I think what you're talking about is in some ways two things: infrastructure of innovation and also infrastructure of long-term innovation. And
Yes.
I think that's big because many times we think about innovation as a big bang, One day Zoom was a great thing and we were all on Zoom. But I think what I'm hearing you say is there is strategic thinking behind each of those choices, as to whether you let Zoom become number one or number two. There's a strategic choice that is behind it. And some of what enables that strategic choice is long-term thinking, but it's also just the conviction and the courage around that long term. And the reason I like that is because, let me just say what I'm hearing. I think what I'm hearing you say is some of what we're benefiting from has been invested on for the last 30 years. And so it's easy to go and see the tech Copilot as an example. And then I'm not a tech person. I'm using my understanding of this, but it's easy to see Copilot today and miss that Copilot is the fruit of research, patient capital, failure, restarting again for the last 30 years.
100%. Even another example is when you look at great universities in the US and how their endowment funds ensure that that continues, or even some of these great learning institutions that were started by a family,
Like
and they were
Stanford.
exactly, it has to continue, and even put structures to say this is the continuity, as an example.
Love it.
Mm.
And I want to make sure that we all catch this. There are two elements to this conversation that are important to us. The first element is you must embrace long-term thinking. A lot of the reason we do not build is we are looking for urgent wins. I call them urgent wins because nani alisema ni urgent. And I just have some bad news for some of us. There's no such thing as an urgent win. It becomes a win because people have invested years into it. I always share this. I work with a coach who's a phenomenal guy, and he's in California. And the first question he asked me is, Esther, what's your 20-year plan? I thought, Jesus Christ, umenipeleka 20 years. That's how we ended up adopting 2050. And we started asking ourselves, what is the vision of the nation, of the institution for 20 years, 20, 30 years from now? And I think the point I want us to pick from there is no urgent wins. There is just investment, research, failure, long-term thinking that produces those long-term wins.
100%. And we have to train ourselves to tame the temptation for approval.
Say more.
Or the way in school. You see, in school, number 1, 2, 3 were celebrated, or number 1. Right? And that mentality, I'm not saying people not to be competitive, but it has its limitations.
I agree.
And I love what Alenga has put in the chat. Not everything is meant to happen quickly. We can't all be number 1 at the same time. Some things will just take time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that because I think that, and there are a lot of case studies that you can go and dig up, but what you will find is every great thing took time. And that time allows it to be perfected so that then you encounter the perfect version. But when you encounter the perfect version, it's easy to imagine that this is something that just came out of nowhere. And so long-term thinking as a practice is something that we all need to practice. And I like what you're saying, because I think the sabotage of long-term thinking is the comparison, is the emergency of I must be number 1. And because of that, then you start to think, hey, hii mambo Esther anasema is a privilege for Esther and Catherine, and it is fine. We will
And I
all be
must post,
privileged. Yes.
on LinkedIn. Look, I'm not saying you don't post, but there's
Yeah,
another temptation to post so that you get applause, Instagram
absolutely.
filters. Not everything. Some,
No,
let it bake.
yes.
Mm.
Cook it. There is
Yes.
a difference between a meal that has gone through quick. If you lived in the West, you will know. Their food. I mean, the thing I normally miss is our food. The way it goes through a long process, and then there is an orange you pluck. There's a difference between a Ugandan orange and hizi ambazo zinakimbishangwa. And so the long-term thinking, but also the second thing that I'm hearing you say is around the long-term thinking and I think in terms of because I think we hear most conversations in ORS and succession planning together. Because if you have long-term thinking, but you haven't transferred the basics of the technology that you started with, then the other person comes and starts at ground zero. And this is a mistake that we make often in our context. I am employed. The next person comes and starts at ground zero because I am the only one who understood how Zoom works. And I think it's a big failure for us not to be able to ask, what do I know? What must I make sure that the next generation doesn't start the same place I started? They can stand on my shoulders and be able to move further and faster. And so that process of documentation, of training, of preparation, and I like the example that you give. I know Paul Russo. Paul Russo was our HR in PwC those many years. He was HR. And Oigara was actually PwC even before I was in PwC. And so when they started to work together, you could see the system that they put in place that would ensure that you have a success in the succession plan. And that takes time. Again, it takes strategy, again, it just doesn't happen. And the last thing I'm going to share here, and I think there are a lot of things that you're saying that I think are useful, is constantly thinking of the next, and asking, how do we manufacture and produce the next? Who is the next Catherine? And what is the work? Part of the reason we are doing these conversations is to manufacture and produce the next Catherine. To be able to say, is there somebody out there who can do even bigger things with regards to the university, with regards to women in tech, with regards to the digital economy? But that's only possible if she names what she has done, documents it, and is able to say, come, usianze hapa. These are the mistakes I made. I showed up in a meeting. There's a next one.
100%.
Yeah, I love that.
100%. And you've nailed it, Esther. One of my other whys, why did I say let's mentor young ladies? I didn't have Catherine to look up to when I was growing in tech. I didn't have, because tech continues to be a
And
male-dominated field. So
foreigners.
yes, and then also I acknowledge, for me, it's not a joy that I am the first female leader. No, for me, it's about how do we create more who will even do amazing things. Yes, and that's why I also love Gen Z. We who are not Gen Z, our work is to equip. Yes,
Love
our
it.
work is contribution of legacy. It's to equip. Yeah.
I want to chime into this sustainability and long vision discussion. Thank you very much,
Yes,
Catherine, for
please
being
go for it, Dr. Anne. And please also we invite you guys, put up questions, comments in the chat room of things that you also want to hear from us. Go for it, Dr. Anne.
Yeah, I think for us on the continent, one of the other things that we must do is also broaden our thinking beyond our individual countries. Africa is 54 countries, I think 1.6 billion people, but very fragmented markets. And, as I'm saying this, what comes to mind is what we saw during COVID, and someone in the chat has actually talked about COVID, is that we saw the countries in the global north all manufacturing their own vaccines, prioritizing themselves and so on, and became very last in the chain. And we started asking ourselves at an AU level, at country level, that Africa really needs to take charge, of our sovereignty. We need to manufacture our own drugs, we need to manufacture our own vaccines. But what we've started seeing now is each country running in the same direction and planning to manufacture the exact same things. And so, what will be the market for these drugs? So if every single country on the continent is making the exact same thing, maybe this vaccine, that vaccine, and so on, where is the market really? And so I think also as we think about sustainability, about vision, about strategy and long-term growth, I'm really persuaded that we have to think beyond our individual countries and look at Africa as a whole. I think together we have stronger negotiation power. How can we consolidate the markets that our continent has across sectors? Right? I mean, I think in the 70s, if you are studying medicine, you were in Makerere. If you are doing law, I think you are was it Nairobi University of Dar es Salaam. And having that sort of differentiation led to very high levels of expertise, because when you have one school just focusing on one thing, I'm not saying that's what we need to go back to, but I'm thinking about it in many other ways and seeing how can we specialize. Perhaps a certain country can specialize in producing one particular thing or really deep diving. And so I think for me, that regional integration and cohesion is really critical for us in terms of building a stronger Africa and stronger institutions and systems that outlive us, and also help spread the resources across.
Agreed. And I think the reason I love it, there's a conversation that we had last time around. There's an unhealthy competition. Unhealthy is the word that has been embedded within the continent of Africa. Because of that, when we hear Tanzania has put up a road, as opposed to celebrating it, it starts to become but Tanzania. And then that sounds like a small thing, but it's a culture thing that becomes we cannot build cross-country kind of collaborations. And so you end up starting, every country I cannot imagine every country doing research on COVID individually. And in the process, we end up with wasted time. wasted resources, wasted energy, because you're all doing the same thing. And so that whole idea of asking what are the regional solutions that we can put together is a challenge for our generation and generations that come. And I actually think part of it is, how do we build, and we'd love to figure this out, but how do we build experiences that enable the healthcare person in Nigeria and the healthcare person in Ghana and the healthcare person in Tanzania to interact with the healthcare person in Kenya? And not from a superiority perspective, but as a one people kind of perspective. Because I think the boundaries have been put in place in a way that has alienated people. When you think about even infrastructure, they say it is easier to go to Europe than it is for us to go to Senegal, as an example. And so how do we think in regional terms, in terms of healthcare, in terms of technology, in terms of education? I think is a big deal, that something that you're saying. And perhaps takes me to a question that I would love for you, Dr. Anne, to spend some time on. A lot of your work has been done, that you've done, is around bringing together, whether that's governments, development partners, private sector. Like when I listen to your work, I hear systems and I hear collaboration. And collaboration is generally hard. Let's just call it what it is. But I want to learn from you. What have you learned about building collaborations between institutions, and especially institutions and individuals that don't think alike? So when you think about sort of the work that you've done, a lot of that work is rooted in collaboration. It wouldn't be possible for us to have a healthcare federation without collaboration. But I think that's the same language I see across a lot of the other things that you're talking about. That collaboration is a big part of success in imagining systems and institutions that last. And so I'm wondering, how do you, and maybe some example around ways that you've brought collaboration that, and especially of institutions that don't think alike, just some lessons around that could be useful.
Thank you so much, Esther. And you're right that collaboration is not always easy. But I think one of the things that makes it easier is being crystal clear on what you're trying to achieve, on the goal that you're trying to achieve. And then it's easier then to align priorities, stakeholders around a common agreed upon goal. So, for example, we are clear as a country that we're on the journey towards universal health coverage. And basically, universal health coverage means that we are providing quality, accessible, affordable healthcare to all, regardless of their economic status. Now, that goal, that definition, that vision is clear across both the public and the private sector. The government has chosen the vehicle of SHA, the Social Health Authority, there are different funds in there to support them in achieving this goal. So that is clear for both the public and the private sector. I'm now wearing my private sector hat. We are aligned as a country that both private facilities and public facilities are important to achieve this goal of universal health coverage. In Kenya right now, about 50% of care and 50% of healthcare providers are private healthcare providers. And so the government is very clear that they cannot achieve their vision of universal health coverage by focusing on the public sector alone. So we are aligned on that. Now, some of the pain points that have been there, I had someone asking about SHA. And, today I had a very long 2-hour meeting with the Minister of Health and, the team. They are trying to sort out some of these issues. But the important thing that we kept on coming back to is these are the goals, right? And therefore, the issues that we wanted the CS to unlock for us, were they driving us closer towards these aligned goals or not? And we kept on coming back to that. And, that's just one again. Of course, I can't go into the details of the meeting. We all know how hot topics around health financing are right now. But I think just having that common aligned vision, that goal is really critical. In my previous area of work, one of the really big projects that I was involved in, that eventually led to the development of what we call the FI Facility Improvement Financing Act, all started with collaboration and alignment. So when devolution came into place, what happened was that there was this law called the Public Finance Management Act that was put into place that mandated that all resources that are collected in any public facility at county level go into this big black box called the County Revenue Fund, CRF. And so that also included resources from all public health facilities. So if a hospital does a surgery, collects money, if a patient pays for drugs at the pharmacy, all these funds would go to the health facility and immediately go into this county revenue fund. And they were therefore not available and accessible immediately at health facility level. And in many counties, those resources did not come back from the county revenue fund to the health facilities. And we started seeing big challenges almost immediately. I remember visiting a facility that really stuck in my mind in Western Kenya that had closed for 2 weeks. This was a level 4 facility, right? That I remember did many surgeries in a day, for example, and so really serving the population. It was closed for 2 weeks because they had no soap. And the head of the hospital, the medical superintendent, just said, I'm done. I'm done collecting money on a daily basis, channeling it to this county revenue fund, and I'll never see it again. I do not have detergent to clean the hospital. So you can imagine if a hospital doesn't have detergent, that's really the basics. What else doesn't it have? And it became very clear to me and my team, because we're supposed to support the country in designing and implementing various healthcare financing reforms, that this was a very big pain point for the counties. And what the law allowed for at that time was each county could make a law that allowed institutions to retain the resources that they generated to be used at facility level. And so we'd go to each county and we're like, again, the vision, universal health coverage. Are we clear that we want that every citizen of Makueni County, Kakamega County, Kisumu, whatever county, to access affordable, accessible quality care? Yes, right? Are we clear that the hospitals need resources to be able to maybe plug medicine gaps if drugs haven't come from KEMSA or are delayed? Are we aligned that they need resources to be able to plug these gaps? Yes. Now, there was a lot of tension at county level between Treasury and the Ministry, the Department of Health at county level. So that for the Department of Health, they really wanted this law done like yesterday and the resources to flow back. But Treasury had significant concerns around facilities retaining and accounting for these resources. And therefore, again, being clear on the goal that we are trying to achieve, but then also addressing the concerns that Treasury had or the county finance departments was really important. So we supported the counties. We worked with initially 3 counties to develop this legislation at county level that would allow the hospitals to retain the resources that they collected. But we had to listen to the concerns of Treasury and address those in the legislation. That's around accountability and make sure that, we have, like, for example, there were, very strong governance structures at facility level for those funds to make sure that the funds are being used correctly. But it was very difficult. I remember for most of those counties, we took up to 1 year, just to be able to align, because this had to go, the governor had to be brought on board. And you would sometimes find in some cases that a governor was aligned either to the health sector or on the other hand was aligned to the finance department. And therefore, that's what he thought. But you had to bring all the stakeholders together. And for us, we had to keep on reminding, this is the vision that we are trying to achieve. We want patients to walk out of here with drugs. We do not want the poor to suffer. We want, if someone needs a surgery, to be able to access it on that day because the theater is working, because the theater equipment is working, because electricity has been paid in this health facility. And after doing that I think we did that for about 3 years, we realized that, the whole country, all 47 counties needed this. And we couldn't go around, we did not have the capacity to go around from county to county to county. And, brainstorming with the team, we realized that we have to go through the Council of Governors. So again, collaborating with a different actor, elevating that conversation from county level to national level. And so approached the Council of Governors. We also worked with a few other partners in the development space. And we also worked with the Ministry of Health, whose vision was very clear. And it took a while, but we developed what at that time we were calling the model law. And so this was a law that the Council of Governors would encourage each individual county to pick up and adopt, because we are realizing that counties were starting to make their own laws that are not really helping the kids. And eventually, this is actually the law that this model law was what was picked almost, verbatim to be the Facility Improvement Financing Act that was signed into law by the president, and that now compelled all counties to allow facilities to retain resources. I think what did I learn from that? One, I learned that you can start small. Our vision was big,
Yeah.
but we were not able to start initially the whole country. But also as we went on from county to county, there are so many lessons that we learned at county level, including what sort of law, what sort of provisions make sense and address the needs of the Department of Health at county level and also the Department of Finance. And those lessons were really critical in designing this national model law that was then eventually enacted into the F5 Act. And so I think, again, for me, it goes back to starting small, starting what we have, starting where you are. And that can actually eventually impact the whole country. The vision and the goal is clear. And so, Esther, just to sort of summarize what you asked me, like, how do you collaborate? I think aligning actors around a common goal. That is a goal that everybody wants to achieve. They may want to achieve it in different ways. Their concerns about how you achieve it might be different, and we have to listen to all stakeholders and make sure that we're addressing their concerns as we, as we achieve this goal. Thank you.
Love it. I love it. I love it. And I bet that Catherine would say the same model in moving from one university to another. What I'm hearing that's big is a common goal. I think that's important. I also hear about listening. That I think is a life skill, because if you do not hear what brings Anne to the table, what brings Catherine to the table, and people will not tell you, this is what brings me to the table, listen to me. You must be very awake to hear what brings them to the table. You must also be willing to adjust and figure out how you meet everybody at this table. This table is a trading table, and how do we all trade in this table is something I'm hearing. But I think the bigger thing that I want to lift as we start to wrap up this conversation is learning the power of build, starting small, because that becomes a center of excellence that you can replicate. And so when you go to one county and you do the work, even if it takes a whole year, what you've done is, or 10 years, it will not take 10 years, but what you've done is you've created a center of excellence that then you can go into another county and say, we did this in Murang'a County, these were the outcomes. And so learning to start small to the lowest level, leverage on that to learn, leverage on that to ask, what can we pick from this that we then go and replicate, is a very big part of the whole process. I want us to start to wrap up this conversation because I know my time is up, and Fidel will only be able to take maybe one quick conversation. I don't know if there's anything that you want to lift in the chat room. Please highlight one or two that you will lift for us. We must close in the next 8 minutes. So just one last remark, Catherine, like in 1 minute, one last thought that you could share. Let me also share before Catherine goes. We will have a Women of Purpose Summit in October. I want to invite you guys to be part of that. I do hope that this will figure out a way of Catherine and also Dr. Anne and others continuing this conversation there. We are committed to making sure that we activate women to go beyond personal success. And so we are continuing to build communities that will enable that. So please look out for the information for the Women of Purpose Summit in October. But yes, Catherine, last thought, maybe in a minute, as Fidel picks up one comment that she'd like to lift.
Fantastic, great conversation. First submission, sisi ndio tuko.
True story.
This is it. Yeah, sisi ndio tuko. We are the ones we have been waiting for.
For sure.
Yeah, on a serious note, what do I mean by that? We must now move from talking to doers. Yeah. I think there's enough inspirational stories. You may have listened to Daktari, myself, and get inspired. Let's move beyond inspiration.
Absolutely.
Many people read books, and books are important. Many people have many certificates, and those are important. But it's a time to shift from acquiring knowledge to action. It's a time to shift from being inspired to action. Because truly, sisi ndio tuko.
True story. I couldn't say it better. And doing the work is a discipline. I think the reason many of us like to be inspired is it feels nice, and we haven't gotten into it. None of these stories are possible without the discipline of work, without failure, without challenges. There's a framework that Microsoft has that Catherine took us through. That's
Oh,
a garage
yes.
framework that we won't get into today. But at the core of that garage framework was start, fail, learn. Start again,
Yes.
fail, learn. I think this idea of there's somebody else who is doing the work for us, sisi ndo tuko, get to the mud, get your hands dirty
Yes.
is a
Yes.
fantastic
And get a tribe. Get a tribe who
Mm,
understands sisi ndio tuko.
I love
Because
that.
there will be rough days. You need an Esther telling you, Catherine, it's 9 p.m. She comes with a lot of energy. We all need an Esther. Yeah, and a tribe that tells you, let's keep pushing.
Love it.
Thank
And
you.
that's important,
Yeah.
especially for people who think of themselves as individual stars. You cannot build alone. It just doesn't work.
No.
Dr. Anne, last thought.
First, I really, really love what Catherine said. It's something that I've really been thinking about as well. Really, sisi ndio tuko. Maybe the only thing that I would add onto that is that we all have power wherever we are, and therefore, let's not look up to the president and say, Ruto has to do this or this minister has to do this, so we are waiting for this. And we all have power wherever we are. Within our own spheres of influence, we can change this country, we can build those systems, those institutions that we need one by one. So let's start small, let's start where we are, and let's influence others around us to be part of that positive change. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Fidel, you only have one person to speak. Only one comment you will lift. We will do the job of looking through these comments, so the team has taken them up. Any questions? We intend to prepare some document that we'll share with you that answers any recurring questions, but time is time. And so I think the most important thing was for us to sort of mind this conversation, but we have picked, and I love that there is engagement in the chat room. Fidel, we must finish at 9:15. One person.
Thank you so much, Esther. Thank you so much, Catherine and Dr. Anne, for the amazing conversation tonight. And for your final remarks. I'm just going to bring maybe to one for Dr. Anne and the other one for Catherine. So one person says, I would like to know what Catherine and Dr. Anne are in regards to how Kenya can help map the crisis in Congo. It will be in our best interest since we are at risk because it's the largest outbreak in history. It's right next door, and the health system there has faced significant challenges following USAID cuts. Microsoft has provided computational resources and talent, while Dr. Anne knows some epidemiologists. If samples are confirmed in Kenya, and as claimed by government, as has been claimed by the government, computational biology, genomic mapping and epidemiology would help us develop a risk awareness that I think we don't have, which we had during COVID, because that threat posed a risk to America, where the private sector, citizens in a private capacity were contributing to this awareness. Maybe just one comment from
No,
Dr.
we will actually
Anne,
not get into that comment
Catherine,
because of
then we
time.
can close.
I think because of time, that's one of those that we will have to pack. I bet that would take very long. I just would like for us not to go beyond that. I will read something Joseph said, such an interesting conversation here. Thanks to the organizers and everyone in the meeting, just to pick up on values mentioned earlier in the conversation, such as work ethic, accountability, and integrity. They are key to achieve the changes we desire as a country, as I believe we've got the resources needed. My worry is that we have been preachers of these values and not doers. There is need to redesign lessons delivery by teachers to the young generation in schools so that they are delivered in a manner that enables students practice those values in their daily lives. Practice of those values from an early age is one of the sustainable ways to change the country. I can see there's a lot of engagement. I know there's a lot of conversations we could have. I love that conversation for Congo. That's a whole lecture by itself. I will ask for permission for us to close there. We normally take a photo of us who are here. So Fidel will ask us to if you are able to unmute yourselves, and then we all take a photo. I'm removing all of us from Spotlight so that we all take a photo. Remove Spotlight is what I was attempting to do, and remove PN so that we all take a photo. So please switch on your camera so that then we close this with a photo. But a very big thank you to Catherine, to Dr. Ann, to Fidel, to Carol, to Mary, to Kithia, to everybody who made this conversation possible. It is obvious that 1 hour is not enough for these conversations, but it is obvious that 1 hour is enough for us to have questions to sit with and takeaways like Sisindio Tuko, and that's good enough. And so we will close there. It's nice to see so many of you. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. We hope that you picked up something. We hope tomorrow we see some LinkedIn post and you tag myself, you tag Lapid, you tag Dr. Ann, you tag Dr. Catherine. Please be challenged enough to at least do a conversation. For the women in the room, we hope you will join us for the Women of Papa Summit. You will get information on that. For the men in the room, we have a lot of programs that we will share information on that you should be part of. This is not a one-off. The job is to build. The dialogue is unbuilt future, and that unbuilt future must be built. And Sisindo Tuko, and we're the ones to do that work. So thank you for being part of this conversation. I am hoping that Mary is taking a photo. If anybody else will be switching on their cameras, please do. We will be back at the last 2 weeks of August. We have a phenomenal speaker called Jeff Sean. He's going to be joining us then. I think we also have another thing on 27th August, because this work of Unbuilt Futures must be done. I do hope that we've taken the photos. Again, asanteni sana. I want us to close there. I made a commitment at 9:15 that we meet on 1 minute. So I will just close with a word of prayer, and then we close. Lord, we honor you. We bless you for the conversation that we've had. We thank you because when we sit at your feet, Lord, we find you are the first builder, Lord. Everything that we are, you said you did the work, and it was. And so, Lord, you're inviting us to be more like you. And Father, I pray that everything we've talked about here today, Lord, that it would find in us good soil. And that, Father, it would take root, that it will continue to grow. Paul planted, Apollos watered, but ultimately it is you who grew it. So grow the seeds we've put on the ground and enable us to build what comes next. We honor you for this conversation. We thank you for the work that Catherine continues to do. We thank you for the work that Dr. Ann continues to do, and everyone in this space. We decree, we declare our dependence on you, that we cannot do anything without you. So continue to lead us, we ask. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much, everybody. Fidel, I have done the closing for you. I am sure you have more things you'd have added, but I really want us to close there. Asanteni sana, and I wish us all a very blessed evening. Thank you. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.